For this project, we will be making a paper lantern. I chose this project because it's a 3-dimensional project. However, since paper is paper thin, when creating this project, we won't have to worry about the thickness of our material. If you were to make something out of wood or acrylic, then you would have to adjust your project for the thickness of the material. In our case, most of our materials are about 1/8 inch wide. But since we're working with paper, we don't have to worry about that just yet. Our first step when creating this lantern is to first make our template. The template has 4 walls and a bottom. The 4 walls are where we will create our cutouts, and the bottom is just to hold our light or candle. You will also notice some flaps which have been created so that you can glue the lantern together. The first tool I'm going to grab is the rectangle tool on the left side. I'm going to click and drag on my canvas to create a rectangle, and then I'm going to select that rectangle and go to my transform tool to plug in my dimensions. For this project, the dimensions will be a height of 768 pixels by a width of 480 pixels. You will notice that I use the zoom and zoom out shortcut keys a lot. This is simply Control plus or minus. However, you will notice that the tools and interface changes size as well. If anyone knows a better way to do this, let me know in the comments. Once I have my dimensions, I'm going to click on my copy tool and make 3 copies. I'm going to change the distribution to left to right. And lastly, I'll change the spacing to 0 so the copies are sitting right next to each other. After zooming out, I'm going to create another rectangle using my shape tool. I'm going to select that rectangle and go to the transform tool and plug in these dimensions. 480 pixels by 480 pixels. Once I have plugged my numbers in, I'm going to bring that square down to sit just below my far left paper lantern wall. I then want to create my flaps. I create yet another rectangle, and this time I plug in the dimensions 192 pixels by 48 pixels. To start with, we want our flaps to be tall, not wide. So I use the transform tool to rotate or spin my rectangle 90 degrees so it sits tall. Once I spin my rectangle, I use my copy tool to make 3 copies, and then I make 1 more and rotate the last one so it sits wide instead of tall. At this point, I should have 4 tall flaps and 1 wide. I place these flaps like the diagram shows. Again, it is important to note that if I was using thicker materials, I would have to be more meticulous or detailed about how I place these flaps. Once everything is placed, I get my selection tool and create a selection box around everything. This is going to allow me to use the Boolean tool, which can be found on the right-hand side. We're going to press the Unite button, and this will combine all the lantern walls and flaps together into one shape. I'm doing this because I don't want 10 individually cut pieces of paper, but one that I can then fold into the shape I want. With the template done, we're going to export it as an SVG and open a new file to work on our cutouts. The first cutout we're going to work on is this silhouette of the Mandalorian. To do this, we are going to import the image we want to trace. We size that image down by grabbing the corners of the image. If you don't want it to warp along the way, hold Shift while you do this, and we'll keep its shape as you size it up or down. Now, I don't want to accidentally grab my reference image, so I'm going to go to my layers and lock the reference image down so I can't move or accidentally grab it. And then click the plus button in layers to create a new tracing layer where I can do my work. I am now ready to use my pen tool to start working on my trace. The pen tool can be a little tricky to get used to. I wish I could say there is an easier shortcut to learning this tool. However, the best thing you can do is practice using it. The pen tool basically connects 2 points together. Every time you click, it creates a new point for it to connect to. If you are simply clicking, it will create a straight line from point A to point B. However, if you click and drag, it will create handles for your point, which will allow you to curve your line or make a rounded line. For this graphic, we're going to start with straight lines, then move on to the curved, and then lastly, a combo of both. To get started, I'm going to find the parts of the cutout that are straight and simply click anywhere I see a corner or a sharp place where the two lines meet. This gets a little trickier the closer the points are, so as I do this, you'll notice that sometimes I place a point nowhere near the corner or sharp points. This is just to get the point down on the canvas because I can always move it after with the point tool, which can be found here. If I do switch tools, I need to make sure that I click an open point with my pen tool to continue the line. That's a point that either starts or ends the line. You cannot click points in between and build lines out from those points. Basically, we can't create a Y with the pen tool because it will confuse the computer when we go to cut out our design. This is due to the computer seeing the Y as two separate pieces. Moving on to the curved lines. To create a curved line, you click once with your pen tool to start the line, and then click and drag to create a curve. Depending on where your cursor is, you can push the curve out or in, and you can angle the curve as well. It is important to note that you want more points for a smoother curve. If you try and make a half circle with only 2 points, it's going to stretch that curve to try and fit, and it won't look very good. My rule of thumb with curves is no more than 90 degrees. Or if you were looking at a pizza with 4 slices, you wouldn't go past 1 slice, or 25% of the circle. When creating curved lines, if a curve is pushed hard, the next point you make can sometimes take on some of that curve, making funky shapes. To avoid this, you can press Enter or switch tools to end the line and restart it. This way your next point won't carry the information over from your previous point. This trick is absolutely needed when switching between straight and curved parts of the line. You will see me switch tools and then continue the line to get a straight line forming out of a curved one. I can also use my pen tool to add more points by clicking the line. Once I've completed my cutout, I'm going to delete my reference layer and export my Mandalorian cutout to use later. Since every time I export, it names it a generic name, I find it in my downloads folder and rename it so I can find it easier next time. I create a new file again, and now we are on our last graphic, which is the gear. This gear graphic is the one I want to place on every other lantern wall. To create these gears, I'm going to use 3 tools: the shape tool, the boolean tool, and the alignment tool, which can be found here. First, I make a circle. I have no exact measurements for this. I just eyeball a size that feels right to me. I then create a rectangle that will act as the spoke to my gear. Using the copy tool, I create multiple spokes for my gear. I make sure to snap the anchor point to the middle of the circle. The copies follow the anchor point's movements and will always spawn from that point. Once all the pieces look good, I make a selection box over all the shapes and click my Boolean tool. The Boolean tool is a pretty amazing tool, though the way it works can be a little tricky to understand, so I just want to quickly go over that now. The Boolean tool is unique because it can take a shape, such as a rectangle, circle, or even a star, and turn it into an additive shape or a subtractive shape. What this means is that I can combine shapes together to create brand new shapes, or I can use a shape almost like a cookie cutter and have it slice through another like dough. Let me show you exactly what I mean. I have 2 shapes selected. The Boolean tool then gives me these options. Unite will take those 2 shapes and combine them into one new shape. Subtract will take the shape that is on top to cut into the shape below it. Exclude gets rid of the area that the 2 shapes touch. However, this option works better with simpler shapes. If it gets too complicated, the program doesn't know how to handle it. Then there is intersect, which keeps only the area where the 2 shapes touch. Let's see that again, but with simpler shapes. With that demonstration done, let's return to our gear. Having selected my shapes, I use the Unite option on the Boolean tool to combine them all together. We are then going to create the inside of the gear. We do this by making a smaller circle in the center of our gear. I then create a thinner rectangle to slide through the gear spoke. I use the copy tool once more and move the anchor to the center. I move the outer part of my gear out of the way so I can make a selection box around the remaining objects without grabbing the outer gear as well. I use the Unite option in my Boolean tool to combine the pieces together. I place the inner gear back on top of the outer gear. I make a selection box around the whole thing and use the Subtract option of the Boolean tool to cut the inside. With my gear complete, I export once more as an SVG and proceed to piece my lantern together. I do this by first opening my lantern template. I then import my Mandalorian graphic in and place it on the wall I want it. I import my gear graphic in and use the copy tool with the grid option to create a wall of gears. I place my graphics on the lantern and voila, I'm done. And all that's left is to export this puppy. At least I would have if my internet hadn't died on this browser-based app. So I pieced it back together off camera and saved it. I plopped that newly created SVG file into my laser cutter. I watched this puppy work its magic for a whopping this amount of time. Used a glue stick and ruler to finish it off, and there it was, my Mandalorian lantern, ready in time for Halloween. If you liked this video or want to see more laser cut tutorials, hit that like and subscribe button. Until next time.